All right, who wants to go to war in Yemen? Nothing? Nobody? Silence? Okay, well, might not be up to you. Might not be up to me either, but it does sound like that's a conversation happening behind closed doors in the U.S. government. Now, to be fair, they're not talking about, from what I can tell, a direct amphibious assault on the shores of Yemen, more that we could be providing direct support to forces on the ground as they take on the Houthis, which is, that's something. So diving in here, this is an article published yesterday in the Wall Street Journal titled, U.S. Strikes Spur Plans for Yemeni Ground War Against the Houthis. Quote, the Wall Street Journal reported Tuesday that militias in Yemen are planning a ground offensive against the Houthis, seeking to take advantage of the momentum created by the recent wave of U.S. strikes. According to U.S. officials, groups in Yemen see an opportunity to oust the Houthis from at least the coastal areas along the Red Sea, which have been under the control of the Iranian-backed terrorist organization in recent years. I think it's worth real quick taking a look at a map here to give you an idea of the area we're talking about. This is live view a map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to give you the full context. We've got Yemen right here in the middle. It is incredibly messy. We're going to do our best to keep it kind of simplified, overly simplified at this point. Maybe this is worth a deep dive in another video. But the Houthi-controlled area is here in red on the west coast. So a couple key notes. First off, that is a relatively, in terms of territorial control, a small portion of Yemen. The Houthis are not the internationally recognized government of Yemen. That is the Republic of Yemen that generally has the rest of the territory. Now, in terms of population control, the majority of the population is under Houthi control. Another key aspect here is if you look at the location of what the Houthis hold, right along the Red Sea, pretty significant territory. This here is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and you can see how ships have to kind of come together, and there's a very narrow passage for international shipping. That is the area that the Houthis have been targeting. There's no way for ships to go around it and still use this passage. So you can see the Houthis having control right along this coast. That's where they're hammering international shipping. Now, there is a small segment, I think in this area right here, of AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, not marked on this map. But the rest here, the green, blue, and shades in between, technically it's different tribes and organizations and factions, some big, some small, but overall they're generally allied together against the Houthis. When you're looking at international influence here, the red, the Houthis, you're talking about Iran being their primary backer. The other groups here, the Republic of Yemen, primarily led by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and then a variety of other Gulf states. Now, moving back to this article to give you an idea of what's in the cards here. They say sources familiar with the matter said that American private sector defense contractors have provided advice to Yemeni elements regarding the potential offensive. Yemeni and American sources added that the UAE, which supports those forces, presented the plan to U.S. officials in recent weeks. They say American officials revealed that the United States is open to providing assistance for a ground assault by local forces in Yemen. However, they noted that no decision has been made yet on whether or not to support the effort. And this is where I want to pause real quick because it's interesting. We have seen this massive buildup of U.S. military power in the Middle East over the course of the last few weeks. And everybody, myself included, is like, well, that's Iran, right? We're talking about B-2 stealth bombers, countless refueling aircraft, more Patriot air defense batteries, THAAD batteries. We've got F-35s. We've got A-10s, a second carrier strike group. And the one that stood out to me there was these A-10s showing up. And people said, wait a minute, why are we sending more A-10s, this ground attack aircraft, to the Middle East to fight with Iran? That's not ideal, right? It's very, very susceptible to surface-to-air missile fire. Well, if we're using it in a ground support role for some Yemeni militias to counter the Houthis, all of a sudden the A-10s might actually be a viable resource. So who knows? Maybe this whole time we've been looking at Iran, it's actually the Houthis. That's what we're mobilizing for in the Middle East. Now, turning back to National Security Council spokesperson Brian Hughes here, he was asked about this, and he said, quote, ultimately, the security in the Red Sea is the responsibility of our regional partners, and we are working with them to ensure that shipping lanes remain safe and open in the future. And I think it's worth, again, taking a look at this map to give you an idea of where this offensive might actually play out, because the United States is, they're not saying that we're going to put, Marines ashore and land some sort of amphibious force here in Western Yemen or anything like that. But when you're talking about, supporting a ground effort, there has to be some sort of communication with those guys on the ground. Probably the thing the United States is going to provide is air power, right? Long-range precision strikes, whether it's air power or coming from the sea. To do that, you can't just hand a cell phone to the local militias. And if they're talking about trying to take back this territory here, I don't know what the chunk would be along the coast to to effectively render the Bab el-Mandeb Strait safe, but it's quite a distance because the Houthi drones can fly. Some of these drones have hundreds, even 1,000-kilometer distance, so range. So they got to push back quite a ways. Again, to do that, you're talking about some of these Yemeni militias moving through. Look, that probably means U.S. advisors on the ground, special operations forces, something like that, coordinating those airstrikes. The best example recently is probably to go back to the opening days of the war in Afghanistan, where the fighting was primarily done by the Northern Alliance, but they had special forces embedded to bring American air power into the fight. And that really tilted the hand. In fact, I think it's probably a really good example the more I get into it, because at that point, the Taliban really had control. They'd pushed the Northern Alliance out, and the balance of power hadn't really shifted. It was pretty set in the Taliban's favor. That's similar to what we're seeing in Yemen right now, where for years now, the Houthis have really held the status quo, and there's been no threat by the Yemeni government to push them out or to reduce their territory at all. If they had American air power on the ground, that could possibly be one of the things that shifts the balance. That said, this wouldn't be the Houthis' first rodeo, and people are always quick to point this out, and they're right. Look, the United States is not Saudi Arabia. Our militaries are very different in a lot of ways, but Saudi has been after this for quite a while. I mean, just today marks the 32nd straight day of American airstrikes being carried out against the Houthis. The DoD says 24/7 strikes being carried out by not just the USS Harry S. Truman, but also the USS Carl Vinson, the second American carrier strike group that just arrived in the Middle East a few days ago. Now I want to turn over to Jennifer Griffin of Fox News, talking about this, the volume and the differences here between the United States, or maybe what we should just keep in mind as we continue these strikes against the Houthis. This is Jennifer Griffin talking on Fox News. Let's give it a listen.
The U.S. has carried out more than 500 airstrikes in Yemen since March 15th. The Saudis carried out 25,000 airstrikes against the Houthis from 2015 to 2019, but failed to stop this Iranian proxy. International ships are still traveling around the tip of Africa to avoid the Red Sea.
And she's right. Look, the Saudis bombed the Houthis for a long time, carried out a lot of airstrikes, and they're still there. This is not something that can entirely be done from the air. So the question here becomes, and it always has been when it comes to the U.S. policy around the Houthis, we're probably not going to bomb our way out of that. Might require some sort of force on the ground, but we do have some different assets we're bringing into the fight. Check out this next clip from Griffin, and there's a little snippet in here talking about this type of munition that we're using. Pretty notable. Here you go.
The USS Carl Vinson, a second aircraft carrier strike group, arrived in the Middle East Thursday, deployed from the Indo-Pacific Command. 6 B-2 stealth bombers capable of dropping America's largest non-nuclear bomb were deployed to a base in Diego Garcia and have been striking Yemen, dropping 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs since the beginning of April.
Yeah, that's right. She's talking about B-2 bombs dropping GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. This is like a specially designed munition that can penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete. I've got a couple pictures here. I think these are the GBU-57. It's kind of kept under wraps to a degree, but nonetheless, it looks like a couple of these pictures made it out in recent years. This thing is massive. And the whole idea here would not be going after a command and control center in a building or, a bunker complex, something like that. It would be deep underground storage facilities. Again, you're talking 200 feet of reinforced concrete. Think of some of the tunnel networks we saw, not just in Iran, but also in Lebanon with Hezbollah. It's believed that the Houthis have a lot of those as well. And when the first articles started coming out talking about these penetrators that we're using being dropped, 30,000-pound bomb being dropped from these B-2s, the idea was, well, they're probably just there to get ready for Iran. But again, maybe it's been the Houthis this whole time. Now, turning over to Ian Ellis, he wrote a pretty interesting comparison here showing the recent wave of U.S. strikes against what was carried out in 2024. He says there's been, now this is a little bit different than Jennifer Griffin, who said more than 500 strikes. Ian here said more than 400. Either way, that's more than double, whether you go 400 or 500, more than double the 200 strikes in all of 2024. Additionally, according to Ellis's assessment here, he says the United States has struck over 100 targets. That's compared with 70 targets during the 2024 strikes. And those 2024 strikes was not just the United States, but also the United Kingdom and Israel. He added that this current wave of attacks is including a broader set of targets and significant focus on targeting leadership. That's something we've talked about here before. There's not been a lot of clarification on the effects of targeting leadership, but it does look like it's expanded the range of the possible targets at the very least. And the last piece he talks about is one Pentagon press briefing versus 14 last year tied to these strikes. And this is something I wish we had more of. We talked about it before, but the Houthis are putting out information left and right, making claims of things they're doing, and we're going to get into another one here in a second. And the Pentagon just isn't. We're getting a lot of videos, a lot of pictures of the aircraft carriers launching these strikes, and great, love our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines out there doing their work in harm's way, I should add. But I'd like to see more from the Pentagon pushing back on some of these Houthi narratives and kind of walking through the effects, the impacts, the outcome of some of these strikes. We're ceding the information space in a lot of ways, and I think unnecessarily. Now, in that information space, the Houthis earlier this week said they shot down another U.S. Reaper drone, MQ-9 Reaper drone. That's an armed Overwatch drone, armed reconnaissance drone. So it can, incredible cameras on this thing, day-night view, all that. But it also can carry Hellfire missiles or bombs, guided bombs. This is the 5th Reaper claimed to have been shot down by the Houthis in 2 weeks. We have seen visual confirmation of 3 of those at this point. The last 2, they haven't released any footage. Houthis generally have been pretty good about releasing that footage, and we'll see if anything more comes of that. I'll be sure to update everyone. This would also mark the 23rd total drone shot down, the 23rd Reaper shot down by the Houthis, according to their statements. Again, I feel like this is a place where the United States could counter it. If this didn't happen, then push back on it. But either way, and it's nothing new, the Houthis do have a pretty significant air defense capability. Now, they're not going to be able to do anything against the American B-2s, F-35s, and they're having a hard time against the F-18s, but we're talking about A-10s moving into the region, and the possibility, I'm taking a leap here, so bear with me, but the possibility that those are used in some sort of ground attack role to support Yemeni militias down the road, those would certainly be at risk of a lot of these surface air missile systems that the Houthis have in their arsenal. But nonetheless, looks like the first conversations are out there floating about the possibility of assisting those militias on the ground and trying to push back the Houthis at the very least, if not topple that organization entirely. Worth keeping an eye on. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.